Hello, this is Jim Robinson from the New Jersey Prog House, and you're listening to Progzilla.
Welcome back, everybody, for episode 2 of Tabletop Genesis. We will be talking today about the album Nursery Cryme. And I am Mike Lord. I am not your host for this podcast, but I'm one of the people who talks first. So let's call it that. Let's go around the table and introduce ourselves, because we are actually the full complement of Tabletop Genesis
The
today.
classic lineup.
The classic lineup for the first of the classic lineup of Nursery Cryme. So let's do it.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Elisa, and I've been a Genesis fan since probably '85, and I look forward to talking all things Genesis with
Excellent.
you all.
My name is Simon, and if you haven't heard me before, then you're going to wish you hadn't. Really, I came to the table, I think, roughly around about the same time as Mike, around about 82.
Yeah, early
82.
80s.
Hello, I'm Stacey Godfrey. Been a fan of Genesis since '86. Got into the band through Phil Collins.
This is Tom Roche, and as I like to say, I was late on the bandwagon, which some people say late on the bandwagon, but I was late. I got into them in '86, also like Stabby, through Invisible Touch, and just went backward through their catalog, and here we are today.
Excellent. So we are talking about Nursery Cryme today. So Simon, would you like to read a bit of the Wikipedia page about Nursery Cryme?
Can I be the Wikipedia wizard?
You are the Wikipedian today.
Okay, fair enough. Right, this is from the wiki page. Nursery Cryme is the third studio album by Genesis and was recorded and released in 1971. It is the band's first album with drummer Phil Collins and guitarist Steve Hackett, who respectively replaced John Mayhew and Anthony Phillips in 1970 and 1971. The five-member lineup, Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Collins and Hackett, would remain consistent until the band's 1976 album, A Trick of the Tail, when Phil Collins replaced Peter Gabriel as lead vocalist. Following Gabriel's departure from the band, Nursery Cryme is also the band's shortest studio album. I didn't know this.
That's interesting.
And the only one to run at under 40 minutes.
Okay. Fascinating.
I did not know that.
Right.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I've never actually really
knew
timed
that.
it out.
Of course you did.
I think that it's interesting because, as Wikipedia mentioned, this is the first album with Steve and Phil on it. We're on first name basis with everybody in the band, of course. So we can say Banks, we can say Collins and Hackett if we need to, but we'll say Steve and Phil for now. This is a mix. This is kind of the first of the classic lineup. Do you guys remember when you first heard this album?
I believe I heard it. I think the first was Invisible Touch, it was said. The second was the Genesis album. And then I think I went to a store called The Wiz, which is not even around anymore.
Right.
Don't look for it, it's not there
It's
anymore.
not there. Don't look for it. It's not there anymore. And they had a sale on cassettes. And so I bought 3. I think I bought Nursery Cryme, Wind and Wuthering, and Trick of the Tail.
Okay.
And I just was getting into it. And when I listened to them, I wasn't aware that there were different singers singing on the different albums.
Right.
And I think I don't remember actually my thoughts on listening to it the first time, but I have a special connection because this album came out about 3 months after I was born, 1971, and I remember when it came out. I think
It was in a diorama hanging over your crib, right?
I think I was pooping my pants because I was so excited
Nice.
this came out, and I thought to myself, 15 years from now, I will finally hear this album.
There you go.
We'll go to their concerts.
Yeah. So, Ellie, do you remember when you first heard this album specifically?
Not the whole album, but songs like obviously the musical box, because I got into Genesis through my older siblings.
You grew up in Argentina, you should be clear about, right?
Yes, I'm from Argentina. I grew up in Argentina. There you go.
Simon, do you remember your first?
Yeah, I do actually. I got It was the second Genesis album I ever purchased, and I remember very specifically I bought it just around about the Christmas of, I think it was maybe 83, and it was really only more or less a year later that I started listening to it in earnest.
Stacey, how about you? Do you remember your first?
I remember, like I mentioned earlier, I came into Genesis through Invisible Touch. So I was like 9 years old at the time. That was it. I grew up, and then when I was 16, a friend of mine said, he's like, well, what music are you into? I said, I like this band Genesis. Do you have their 2 albums? And he Todd, I hope he's listening, he kind of laughed at me, and he just gave me the Genesis A History and said, okay, here you go. This is a very special album for me because it's the first of their early period. This is after I discovered this guy, Peter Gabriel, was also in the band. Right. So, yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in this album.
For me, I must have bought this after Seconds Out. Okay. Because I knew the musical box from being segued on that album from Lamb Lies Down into Seconds Out when it was the encore on the Wind and Wuthering tour. And for me, I remember being like, I want the album with that musical box song on it because I want to hear the rest of it. I know that's the closing section, but what's the rest of the song like? So that was again, probably early on in my Genesis fandom, but it wasn't the earliest piece. So with that, why don't we do our track by track rundown as I talked a little bit about the musical box.
Oh, let's.
Let's talk about the musical box. Who wants to talk first?
The thing that really gets me about the musical box is, and it took a long time for me to realise, is there's absolutely no bass guitar until much later in the song. And I think it was one of the
ones...
And
even then it may just be bass pedals. I don't know if it's a bass guitar.
I think this is one of the tracks, and I'd like to rewind just a few seconds about the lineup and why some of the tracks sound the way that they sound. At this point, I think a good proportion of the tracks on Nursery Cryme had been written prior to the recording, and indeed some of them prior to the arrival of, I think, Steve Hackett.
Steve and Phil to an extent, because it's mainly with Musical Box and Fountain of Samalsis. The other pieces, I think, were written probably, maybe bits of them before that, but I think those are the two they always talk about.
Is this the one of the tracks that Ant Phillips actually had a hand in writing the Musical Box?
In the Musical Box, there's actually on Ant's, one of his archive albums, there's an instrumental called F Sharp that is basically the intro to the Musical Box.
Oh, right. Okay.
That he and Mike Rutherford wrote.
Yep.
So,
because they used to write in pairs, didn't they?
Yes,
it was like Rutherford and Ant.
And Banks and Gabriel.
That's it,
And this was one of the pieces that, before they started recording the album, they had been playing live for a while as a 4-piece before Steve had joined. And what they had, Tony was playing the guitar parts on the keyboard.
Indeed, because he was running it through a distortion box.
Right, and they thought that, well, maybe we'll just carry on as a 4-piece, which I think would have been a big mistake because Steve Hackett brought so much to the band. Right. Mm-hmm. And the parts that he actually brought into Musical Box that had been played by Tony are just, they're indelibly in your mind as Steve Hackett's bits on as guitar parts.
Although Tony's little solos, when they're playing off against each other in that middle part, his keyboard has a very guitar sound to it, which until I saw some live tapes of it, and with Steve's Genesis Revisited band, I was like, oh yeah, that's the keyboard making that sound. The Musical Box, I think for me, it's one of those tracks that, you know, if you're going to start off an album with it, it's the right track to start off that album with. Because it is a statement of, we talked about this, you know, in the past with some songs, this is a statement of purpose. And it really, for me, puts it out there as saying, here's what this band is about in a 10-minute track, you know, kind of what you talked about, Yes album, Yours Is No Disgrace. That was a statement of purpose for them. This is a track that's saying, you know, yes, we had the one album that sold 600 copies. Trespass was kind of the direction we wanted to go in. Now here's a song that's really where we're at.
It's one of those things which I think is a bridge between the folkier days of Trespass and into the effectively the more rock orientated world, and it's a fabulous segue. It's almost like you could imagine that being the last track, if you will, on Trespass, leading in. That could be almost like a double album in that respect.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this song showcases their ability to go from real quiet, kind of folky sound to the larger, louder rock sound. And the way they go back and forth on it in the track, I think it's the best they've ever done.
It kind of was reminiscent of how their live shows were, where they would start off acoustic for a while.
Yeah.
Then as it got towards the end, they'd build with the louder, heavier pieces, and they were able to encapsulate that all in one track, where they start off quiet and they come on to, you know, the heavy end. And I always liked how the beginning, like with Genesis fans who really take this music to heart, that opening chord, that's to Genesis like the roundabout opening chord is to Yes fans. Like you hear that and it brings back memories, and you know what that's like.
Play the entire song in your head.
Yeah, as soon as that goes on, you hear that. You can do that. You're off on your head doing that song. You don't need to hear the rest of it, although you do.
No, just what can I add? No, I think that like the Musical Box is many songs in one song because it has so many atmospheres and moments.
Maybe this is going back to my teenage years, but I can proudly say that I imagine myself on stage shouting out, now, now, and probably did it a few times in my bedroom that way, too. So, anyone else? Yeah, I was going to say, and if you didn't, I know you're lying. Because that's what you did for this song. And it was great. It's one of these songs that, you know, it just works for me on all levels. Except, I will say that whenever I hear that the instrumental section right before the closing section that, you know, is on Seconds Out that way, I always think it goes on just one repetition too much. For me, it's like in my head, I always kind of segue into that end one time before it goes. And I just think, okay, I didn't need to hear that 4 times in a row. 3 times would have been great. But that's my only real critique.
See, I was hoping they would play that 5 times. I was just
that's why we fight about this.
I wanted
stuff,
it one more time.
That's why we fight.
I'm going to make that your new ringtone.
That's a good
and I have to answer it on the 5th time.
Yes.
So.
It won't let you pick up until it plays 5 times.
And that's the thing about this song kind of represents what I love about progressive music is that I give credit to anyone who can write a great song, and I'm not putting down songs that are verse, chorus, chorus, you know. But the fact that this song must have come together organically through, okay, let's do this here and let's move here. Right. It's not like someone came in right away and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to play soft guitars, I'm going to say Nursery Rhyme, and I'm going to shout now 25 times. Everyone got it? Everyone good with that?
Right.
It wasn't like that. It was like just it developed over time, and the way you listen to it, because they had played it live before the recording, it sounds like they're playing this together live.
Right.
It sounds like a live recording from the end, and it's one of those songs that I've heard 1,000 times, and when I was just re-listening to it this week, like, I still get chills listening to this song.
Yes.
And especially that end sequence.
When the end comes and the hair is on, I'm like, I've heard this song 1,000 times, and it still gives me that feeling.
And the band, they were in their early 20s when they did Nursery Cryme. That's the most amazing thing. They were really young.
Yeah.
That's something I think that we'll return to constantly with these early albums, and even with the albums from the 80s, too, that when they were in their 30s, and the solo albums, too, that, you know, these guys had a passion early on for this music, and were able to really, put it out there. All right, so let's, with that, move on to Four Absent Friends.
Sunday at 6 when they closed both the gates, a widowed pair still sitting there. Wonder if they're late for church and it's cold, so they fasten their coats and cross the grass. They're always last.
Four Absent Friends, from what I understand, Steve's talked about this in interviews. It's a song that he and Phil wrote together, and Phil actually sings it. How many of us knew on the first listen of this album that was Phil singing? I certainly didn't.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was Phil or Peter. I was so clueless.
That's one of the great things. Their voices were almost seamless together.
Right.
They blended well together, and you can hear that. Especially live, they were exchanging melody lines, and it was very, very seamless.
Sure. Yeah, and that's something that, with Steve and Phil bringing this in, just as a nice, quiet little song, a little of English observation.
Yeah, my first memory of listening to this song was, this is really nice. And I did know it was Phil Collins because I know Phil Collins. Unlike you three.
Because you're better than us.
I am better than you. No, I'm not. But I remember I listened to the song and I go, where the hell's my dictionary? Because what's a roundabout? What's a pram?
Right.
So this was, this is my overall comment on one of my overall comments on the album itself. Like, this was such an English album. I'm a teenager in America, and this was very confusing.
Well, I can understand that. There's a whole load of social commentary that goes on. One of the things that I love about this song is it harkens back a little bit. It's that Eleanor Rigby-esque confessional about everyday dreary lives, that kitchen sink drama which the British seemed to be fascinated with during the 50s and 60s, about just normal everyday life. And I think it was a story about, is it two spinsters or something?
I think so,
Two widows.
Two widows, that's right, yeah. I'm not entirely sure how experienced a songwriter Steve Hackett was at that point in his life.
Probably pretty early on. Again, he's 21 at the time, so it's pretty early in his writing career no matter what, I think.
Well, I think this is a song which I think was more important than I think people give it credit for, is that people think, it's just a little throwaway song. It kind of like is a little buffer between the end of the musical box and the start of Hogweed. But in terms of the band dynamic, giving Steve and Phil, the new guys, a chance to have their own track right there on the album.
Right. They could have said,
Second track on the album. They could have said, you guys are the new guys. Why don't you give it a few albums? We know what we're doing here. It's just, they said, all right, go ahead. We'll guys write a song. We'll put it on the album, and they did that. And I think that probably helped the dynamic of, we're invited the new guys. They're part of us. They're part of the group now, and I think that helped a lot going forward. And I agree with Stacey that, like, when I listen to them, like, pram, now they're just making up words.
Yeah.
There's what's nonsense. A pram? It's all nonsense.
Yeah.
And I think, for my part, with the words, having kind of broken my teeth on yes to begin with, where the words didn't necessarily mean a lot, I didn't pay attention. With Genesis, I didn't really pay attention to the words right off the bat. It was more the sound and the feel of things. And earlier on with Four Absent Friends, it was always, nice little song, a little break between these two much more intense songs.
Yeah, you need that breather between musical box and Return of the Giant Hogweed. Yeah. But the end of, and I could say this about a lot of Genesis tracks, the end of Four Absent Friends, then the space, and then the beginning of Hogweed is just gorgeous. I love that space between the two songs.
It's perfectly timed.
It's the right beginning, middle, end notes there.
Well, that's something I think Tony talked about in interviews a lot, about that, both with live sets, and I think it's generalizable to albums too, is that they would really think a lot about the flow of what an album was. And I think Stacey said in the past that, Phil was kind of the guy who would think about that a lot.
Right.
And I wonder, even on these earlier albums, how they came up with the flow of the albums, with the running order and everything. I would think that, it seems obvious that Musical Box should be first, Some Also Should Be Last, but they're dealing with album sides at that point too. So what's the great middle there? And I bet that there were some arguments about that.
And this was probably the first album. I think Trespass, didn't they that was the order they played it live?
Probably.
Like that was their
probably
set
like
list.
their set.
And then from
Starting
Genesis to
up live.
Revelation, that was kind of piecemeal, and that was Jonathan King.
That was a story in theory.
Yeah, so this was maybe, I don't know. I think this is a great order.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't really...
Yeah.
It's also, this album is also one of the, I think it is the first album which they recorded at Trident Studios.
Okay.
Which is a studio that they would return to for most of the 70s. They didn't record Foxtrot there, and they didn't record the Lamb there, but I know for sure that they used it for Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering,
Selling England,
and I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to check on that, but I think the last thing that they did there at Trident was, and then there were 3.
Sure.
And that was the last one they did there.
No, I think that was recorded overseas in Holland, wasn't it?
It might conceivably have been mixed at Trident.
There might have been some.
Because I know that they mixed Seconds Out at Trident as well.
Okay. Any more thoughts about Four Absent Friends?
No.
Sometimes we just have to wrap it up that way. So let's move on to Return of the Giant Hogweed. Return of the Giant Hogweed is a crazy song.
Yes, it is. It's madness.
I think maybe I'm biased, but I think it's one of the best, if not the best, songs about hogweeds that's out there. I mean, you won't find a better song about hogweeds.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. I think that, it's one of these songs that when a friend of mine gave me a bunch of Genesis boots from the early days, and people would go crazy for Giant Hogweed, and I was kind of like, I never quite got it. Again, it was until seeing Steve's band perform it, and I was like, oh, this is a really good live song. Yeah, like I could see that if you were in the audience back in the day, this is what you'd shout for. This was what they closed with. Right. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a powerful ending. It's a goofy lyric, but it's fun, and it has a bit of danger to it at times. Cool music. It's a fantastic song.
Yeah. It's also one of the ones which features very heavily Tony Banks trying to be the guitarist.
Yes,
as well. Yeah. And you can hear it if you pick them out. You can hear what Tony Banks is doing, and I have to say, Steve perfectly complimenting.
Right.
I mean, they were really at that point. When you consider they'd only just met, the way that they weaved their melody lines in between one another was pretty damn good.
Yeah, it wasn't until I saw the Musical Box perform this live on their, I think it was their Foxtrot show, that I knew who was doing what. Like, I just assumed it was either all Steve or all Tony, and it was just, they were creating this really unique, very creative sound. And I love the energy of it too, as you were saying. It's kind of, to me, this was the Knife Part 2. Right. This is kind of has that same kind of Knife crowd jumping feel to it, which always made me wonder why they never played this live, as far as I was aware. Like they played it on the Nursery Cryme tour, maybe Foxtrot, but like it didn't.
After Foxtrot tour, it didn't. It kind of disappeared.
Yeah, because it has so much energy. Like that's a good. Like I thought that'd be a great crowd pleasing kind of
even as part of a medley, even bits as part of a medley in later years too.
I don't know.
Incidentally, for everybody out there, if you actually want to see a contemporary version of this song played pretty damn well, check out Transatlantic playing it with Steve Hackett at the I think it's HRH, or it might have been a High Voltage gig a few years back with Mike Portnoy on drums and Roy Stoltz, Peter Wavis, and Neil Morse.
I think it's one of those songs that I think you do have to hear live, and it's much better live. It's a song that on Nursery Cryme that I love the intro. When it gets into the turn and run, like,
It's a little slower.
It's a little slower,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of not into it until then it picks up at the end, and for the last 4 or 5 minutes, then you're off onto the races. Then I love it. But for that first part, it doesn't grab me as much as I think some people love it start to finish, but I'm kind of like, give me the first 30 seconds, then I'll check back with you in the last 5 minutes. So I kind of like check out on a little bit during the the talk about the hogweeds, and then when it really starts off, then I'm back with it. And I think Hackett used tapping on the beginning of this, right? Mm-hmm. And I always love it when I hear people say, "Oh my God, look what Eddie Van Halen's doing. He's tapping." I'm like, don't waste my time. Steve Hackett's been doing this since Van Halen was in high school. So
That's right. That's true. So yeah, this song I really like it. It wasn't one of the first I heard from Genesis. I got to hear the song late 80s or 90s, I don't know. But I like the different tempos and different atmospheres, and I think it's a fun song. I like it from beginning to end.
There's when Phil comes in at the start, when they're doing that riff at the beginning, and it's just one of those moments again that I'm like, this is just why having Phil as the drummer is so important to this band,
right.
Because to find something to play to this kind of strange, melodic thing going on with guitar/keyboards, and then to jump into this be able to transition to this very heavy part. Not a lot of drummers could do that, or would figure out a way to do it. All credit to John Mayhew on Trespass, but I don't think he would have found a way to make this work that flowed as well as what Phil did. But of course, anyone will suffer in comparison to Phil Collins.
Right. I think they compose songs, they record them in records, and then they realize playing them live it's not that it's difficult for them because they compose them,
right.
But maybe that's why they didn't play them so often live,
right.
Because it's like tricky,
And I think that retooling of the band lineup is so evident when you listen to Trespass, you listen to Nursery Cryme, just exactly how much of a gear that was changed between those two albums. I mean, I just think that really the arrival of Phil Collins and Steve Hackett just took them to another level, and I get the feeling that they knew it themselves even at this point.
I think you look at Anthony Phillips, and I love Anthony Phillips' solo career, and I have a lot of his albums, but he was much more on kind of the more gentle and melodic side of things, and I don't know how he would have fit in with a band that was looking to also have that side, but also have this aggressive, loud guitar, drums pounding aspect to it, which Ant never really seemed to pursue in his own solo career much. Maybe bits of it here and there, but certainly not to the extent Genesis
You
did.
can hear Anthony Phillips' influence throughout their sound in the 70s, especially when it comes to the 12-string arpeggios and stuff.
Well, it's funny how the reissues, you figure, they'll bring stuff to the forefront that may not have made it to the forefront in the original releases. But even so, it wasn't until I saw the musical box do this song live that I knew that Gabriel shouted "Giant Hogweed Lives" at the end of the song.
Right.
Even in the reissue, I don't hear that. It's buried so
very
low.
faint that there. And when to listen to it, I think on the original mix, again, you could even barely hear it there. On the remix, it's a little bit louder, but not much.
Not much, yeah.
So yeah, I think that those are the little details that, again, live would kind of come to life a bit more. And that is, when everything is pounding at the end of this song, and it's the big organ sound, the guitar's wailing away, drums are going crazy, bass is going nuts with whatever it needs to go nuts with. So I think it's a great live song.
Yeah, it's definitely the most fun for me to watch on that Belgian TV special.
Right.
I mean, Phil's looks like Animal from the Muppets.
They look like
and they're rocking out, but in their reserved English way.
It's
just so
Peter has this
adorable.
jerking kind of motion.
I always thought that Peter Gabriel just looked like like how pigeons, the neck goes forward and back.
Yes, it does.
Sorry about that, but that's exactly how it was.
And I think he'd
He's like,
probably
I'm
say
gonna
the same
pick up
thing.
my mic stand and throw it at you, but let me put it gently down so I don't hurt anybody.
Very
It's,
polite.
love it.
But my God, what an ending to a
yeah.
side really
Exactly.
was.
That makes you want to turn on the next side. And so the next side brings us to 7 Stones.
I just want to say that I particularly don't like this song very much. It doesn't sound like Genesis at all, because for Absent Friends or Harlequin, that has a Genesis vibe, but Seven Stones?
Yeah.
Seven Stones?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'd agree with you on that. I think it does sound like very much. It strikes me as something you get off, especially the melody line off from Genesis to Revelation. It's got a slightly sunnier atmosphere to it. If I was going to point to one track on the album that I felt didn't belong, it's probably Seven Stones.
I think I'm in between. I'm being torn by two sides, because I know there's a side that I used to be on, which is what you guys are on, where like, it doesn't do anything for me. And then I know that some people love this song and like they would swear by it. And I'm starting to see their point, but I'm still kind of like confused, and I don't know what to do. And I think I need help with Seven Stones.
There's a number you can call.
Please.
Yeah, toll free.
777 stone.
So, Stacey, I think you come down on the love side.
Yeah, so this is my favorite track on Nursery Cryme.
Wow. Okay.
So why is it your favourite track?
Yes, explain, please.
Yes.
We
Expand.
need a report on our desk in the morning.
I can't really put it into words. It's not like there's one moment, there's not one person playing on it, it's not Gabriel's vocals, it's just everything comes together. I love the feel of it. I love the atmosphere it creates. I mean, I think it's like, I was looking at it today, so I think it was like 45 seconds or 50 seconds from the end of it. I just get goosebumps and I well up sometimes. I just think it is. I know.
This segment has been brought to you by Kleenex. For all your Seven Stones needs.
But that's the great thing about this music is that it touches you in touches different people in different ways.
It touches my lady stones.
That's right. That's right. All 7 of them.
All 7 of my lady stones. No, and I can hear I can appreciate what you guys are saying about maybe it doesn't sound very, very Genesis. I mean, this sounds very Tony Banks. I mean,
Yes,
if
it is.
anything, the big chords.
Yes.
I'm
pretty sure he wrote the lyrics also.
Yes,
so.
it sounds very much something he would write. So it's devoid of emotion and.
No, it's that contained emotion.
Yes.
I think that's
Does it
what it
mention
is.
double glazing?
Yeah. So that's it. This is my favorite track on the album. I only know one other person who says his favorite. It's Dave Myers from the Musical Box, who actually played all of Tony's music, and he has several albums of his own out covering Genesis stuff and his own, and so. Yeah, we're I think the only 2 in the world.
It does. Admittedly,
that.
I was listening to this album very recently, and the track, I will say that the end of the song is much stronger than the start of the song. I mean, it's an incredibly. I mean, the way that it fades out with that sort of like almost orchestral, sort of like what do you call it? Diminuendo. I don't know what the word is, but
with Seven Stones for me, I just it's one of those songs that was middle of the ground. I feel a bit like Tom that I'm, like a lukewarm moose right now. That I haven't.
What a great image!
Exactly. I think I used to dislike it, and I do think that there's certain music that maybe this is written by 21-year-olds, but as you get older, you have a different appreciation for certain things, and it comes out in a way that's like, this is a bit more wistful, and I think I can appreciate songs like this more now than I could when I was in my teenage years. Granted, again, it was almost a teenager who wrote this song, but I think again that speaks to what's really compelling about Genesis for those of us who are fans is that they're able to capture some of these moods in all of their music that's both universal but also changes over time for your own exposure to it. So that's me for Seven Stones. I feel like I'm a bit in transition about it right now.
I'll make you come around. You
all right, Give me another year.
You're gonna be on my side.
Exactly.
Well, it's I think for what if I can pinpoint why I'm not a huge fan is I think the lyrics just don't. They seem a little bit awkward to me, and I think that was always my sticking point. But now that I've listened to it a bunch, and especially the last couple minutes, I really love and if one thing, I don't skip it anymore. So if I'm listening to the
Sure.
album,
There are
I listen
in
to
the
I'll
plus
take it.
column there. Yeah.
Right. I think for me too, it has to do with the lyrics. It says "old man" too many times, and I picture the old man from the musical box, which is pretty scary to me. So
Yeah.
that's why maybe I don't like the song. Who knows?
Yeah, there's a lot of old man action in this. It's so depressing. Like you were saying, they're 21. Like, what are these lyrics?
Right. But they're very influenced by these mythical stories that they were reading, by science fiction in different ways. And again, maybe they were a bit, I don't want to say old before their time, but I'll say in the more complimentary way, ahead of their time.
Well, and also I think back when, last year when we were all 21. And like, you want, when you're younger, you want to be older.
Yeah,
and when you're older, you want to be younger.
Right.
So I think maybe they were trying to sound older or
Right.
more,
So
mature.
And
right.
something that they could all do, both with Genesis and with solo careers. I mean, thinking about songs like "Through These Walls" by Phil, songs like "Family Snapshot" from Peter, that they could project themselves into other people's, mindset. And I think that, this is, again, maybe an example of, Tony's lyrics where he was projecting himself into this, older, observational type of song.
It's a very British way of looking at things because it's a way of describing how you feel without actually admitting how you feel.
Hi, this is Theo Travis, and you're listening to Progzilla Radio.
With that, we will jump into Harold the Barrel.
Now, I know you've been waiting to hear my take on this.
I have been. I've been patient.
But I think this was the first time you actually hear the sense of humor that the guys had in the band. You didn't hear any of this kind of joking around, kind of weird take on things from Genesis to Revelation.
Yeah, Trespass is not a funny album.
You didn't hear Trespass. And so finally you have Harold the Barrel, where Phil and Peter are singing along this crazy song about this guy who's on a ledge. And they're just having a fun time singing with it. I think it's Peter's song, but Phil sings on it. It's almost like they're singing in tandem.
Yeah.
Phil's not even backup. Like, you wouldn't know who's singing.
It's co-lead vocals that way.
And I think that was part of Phil's coming on board, where he brought them down a few notches, saying, don't take yourself so seriously. Let's have some fun with this.
Well, actually, in some ways, I would say that a lot of this sort of sense of humour is quintessentially English. If you remember, I think it's The Small Faces with Ogden Nuts Gone Flake. It's a very English thing about sort of like, God blimey, governor, what's happening over there? Wouldn't you Adam and Eve? This song is a favourite of mine. I really do like this. And it's not necessarily a favourite because everything in the song really works for me. It's a favourite because of those last few bars of Take a Running Jump.
Yes.
I can't think of a single other band that's ever done something like that. It's cinematic.
Just the way it ends, kind of the slowly with the piano
You can just imagine
chords.
the slow motion jump as he leaps off. It really evokes that quality to it.
Sure. When Ellie and I saw Peter Gabriel do the orchestral shows at Hammersmith, somebody shouted out Harold the Barrel. And it did get, I think, even kind of a laugh and a chuckle from Peter on stage between songs, because it's just such a song that wouldn't be in that orchestral mode that he was going for.
Just that whole
but maybe
idea-
could have been.
Yeah, but it's just that whole idea of, all right then.
Yeah.
Why not?
Let's whip that out with the
2, 3.
Get the orchestra up here. They can do this. No, it's a song that, again, I think being an American teenager in the 80s, it was, some of the humor might have been slightly lost on me. But I also just really appreciated that there was this obviously fast-paced, crazy song, not a comedy number, but a song that had humor to it, in the middle of all this stuff about, hogweeds and For Absent Friends and heavy stuff with the musical box. And I think coming after Seven Stones, it's a nice kind of like, we've had this kind of heavy, kind of more slower paced, serious song, and let's go right into restaurant. And it's like, we're in a different world here now.
I think it was Peter Gabriel testing the waters for Battle of Epping Forest, saying how many lyrics can I put in here without the other members of the band,
Right.
shutting me down.
I see your point, because there's lots of different characters that come
different
into
characters, fast lyrics shoved
I hadn't
in.
thought of it like that.
You kind of like pay attention to what they're saying, like in battle.
When I got this album on vinyl when I first bought it, and then on CD afterwards in the US in the 80s, early 90s, the lyrics were not part of the package.
Really?
Correct.
Oh, no.
This was not like the albums now are this nice little gatefold.
It was a single sleeve,
Yeah, it was a
right?
single sleeve. So,
Yeah, the same thing.
I'm looking at the lyrics now, you get these almost like a little cheat sheet of Man on the Council, Lord Mayor, British Public, Harold, Mr. Plod. I don't think Mr. Plod is named.
Are you making this up?
Let me just say,
He's
Mr.
making this
Plod.
up.
Mr. Plod is actually a policeman. The vernacular for policeman.
Okay.
They're called the Plod.
So glad we have an Englishman here.
Yeah, right?
Translate this to.
We've got 67-year-old Mrs. Barrel in here, so it's...
See, that's a woman called Mrs. Barrel who's 67 years old.
that does clarify that.
I would not have known.
I thought that was a
and
Halloween.
I should have brought my because I bought the lyrics in English and in Spanish, because me being a Spanish speaker, I was dying to know, okay, what this is about, because I was 12, 13, I knew a little bit of English, but so I was like, oh, this is interesting to know.
So this song helped you learn English, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that too.
Can I ask a question,
English,
sort of like being
through the
sort of
music.
like as English is not your first language, although I have to say you speak it better than what I do.
Even when I'm having a gin tonic. So.
But the fact, I mean, what were you getting from the song without fully knowing what the lyrics? Was it literally just the tune? Was it the quality of the voices? I mean,
I think it was the tunes, obviously the music, and the musicality of the words, even though I didn't know what they meant, because they are pretty abstract, some songs, even though you're English speakers, you understand what they're saying, but they are just fantasy or crazy stories.
Sure.
Well, even the Americans may not understand the
There
English
you go,
speakers
so-
all the time.
hey, listen,
So,
even
yeah.
us British guys don't necessarily know what's going on in Mr. Gabriel's mind at
Right.
one time.
So yeah, for me it was just obviously the music, and I read the lyrics in Spanish, but they didn't make sense because the translation is not that accurate. So
Now, I've got a question for you. Is exactly how inaccurate was it? Were there parts where you were going,
I should have read the book, but
he's holding a broom and now there's a hat on his head?
yeah,
Or-
something like that. And then Sabras Ready is like La cena está lista. It's like literal. But
right, okay.
some words translated into Spanish, they don't make sense.
Right.
Well, let's move on to Harlequin.
Came the night, the mist dissolved the trees, and in the broken light, colors fly, fading by. Pale and cold, as figures fill the glade, gray is the web they spin, on and on and on and on.
I love this track.
See, I'm
I
with
think
you
it's
on that.
beautiful.
I really like this
I
track
think
as
it's just one of those songs that, again, listening to it without even paying attention to the words, it sets the mood for me of just this very wistful, relaxed, summertime evening is what this song speaks to me of.
Who wrote this one?
This is Hackett.
Oh, this is
Mike
no.
Rutherford wrote this.
This was a
one.
Oh, you
Rutherford
kidding?
one,
Really?
yeah.
Was it
This is
Rutherford?
I
Rutherford.
just read it in his
Yeah.
book. He just told me this week when I read it. Through the book, of course.
This was-
Yeah.
This was Rutherford with, I think the vocals are Phil, Peter, and Tony. So it's
Yeah.
really a three harmony there.
Wow.
So that's why the vocals sound very different from
Yeah.
the other tracks.
Do you know, I was going to say, one of the things that I read very recently, and I totally agree, was when Phil first heard the band, he thought they sounded like Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Right.
And this is I always associate this with Guinevere from the very first
Okay.
Crosby, Stills and Nash album. It's in that kind of ballpark
Right.
of that very delicate vocal with a sort of
Sure.
like gentle backing in the
Right.
I think for me, the vocals are the weakest part. The music is great, but the sound of the vocals, I've always felt like maybe a female singer would have been better. I think we were listening to it last week,
Kate
Simon
Bush.
and I thought the Monkees would do a fantastic
yeah.
version of this track. It would be more in their range. I don't know
Okay.
if it's out of like Peter's range or something,
Sure.
but that's the one thing that kind of grates on me. It's to me would be a great instrumental. Yeah, right.
Yeah, actually, the first time I heard this song, I thought it was Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh,
Or
really?
something like that. I was
Right.
like, I would have never thought that it was Genesis because it's so different. It's,
And both.
again, this was like cassettes, not real, not even.
Right.
They were recordings or
Sure.
vinyls, whatever. So I didn't know exactly which song it was, but I heard it and was like, oh, but there are Genesis songs in these cassettes, so
This must
this
have
should
been
be Genesis, but it sounds like something else.
Right.
I was going to say it must have been like a huge puzzle that you had to put together at a later stage. Sort of like you must have
Yeah.
known all this material. Oh, it was from that album.
Yeah, exactly. With the lyrics, that
Yeah,
helped.
yeah.
I think the
It was a
reason
puzzle.
why I thought it was Hackett was because Tony has said that he's not really fond of that track, so I assumed it was a Hackett track.
Hey-o.
Harsh but fair.
Right.
I mean,
No, I think it's well, Tony is very honest about what he thinks of this music, and that always kind of comes off, and he does the same thing about. I know that he was very critical of Seven Stones, saying that he thought the lyrics weren't up to snuff, kind of being embarrassing at some point looking back at it, but. That's, I think any of us looking back at things when we're in our 20s would be like, oof,
Yeah.
I did that. So now we get to the end of the album, The Fountain of Samalsis.
From a dense forest of tall, dark pine woods, Mount Ida rises like an island. Within a hidden cave, nymphs had kept a child. Hermaphroditus, son of gods, so afraid of their love. As the dawn creeps up the sky, the hunter caught sight of a doe. In desire for conquest, he found himself within a glade he'd not beheld before. Where are you,
Is that how it's pronounced?
Samalsis, that's how I pronounced it.
I just don't. Salami?
Yeah, I was Fountain of Salami.
that's salami. Yummy.
I've always thought that, the Fountain of Salami.
Samalsis.
I think the way I've heard them say it is the Fountain of Salmasis.
Really?
Or
Samalsis.
Salamassis. I've heard that too. But
Really?
maybe that was other fans I've
Yeah,
talked to.
Salamassis is not right. I'm
I
pretty
just
sure.
added another letter.
New
in
poll
there.
for the website.
Yes.
How do you pronounce?
Well, there's
Fountain.
there's an easy way to remember it. The emphasis is on Salmasis. The emphasis is on Salmasis.
Exactly.
Salamassis.
In Spanish, we say salamansis.
Oh,
we are.
there you go.
Hey, I like that.
Well, I'm
better.
running with that, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Great song.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic
Yeah.
end to the album. Epic at the end.
I think this is the very first song. I think I read that this was the very first song they ever used the mellotron on.
Could be. With that beginning washes of it during the organ part. Sure.
I think there are other Nursery Cryme songs that use the mellotron.
Yeah, but I think this was the first one they actually recorded
They
with the
started,
mellotron. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. Sequencing
That they
is
wrote,
slightly
yeah, or
different,
whatever.
yeah. But I have a love-hate relationship with this. I absolutely adore the music. I mean, that opening, that swell that comes up. I mean, for me, it's the most orchestral moment I think that they had up to that point. And then, unfortunately, for me, it's kind of ruined by a vocalist who's still trying to find his range.
Sure.
Yeah.
Gabriel is, I don't know, Gabriel's a young man at that point, and I find that the melody line is a little bit shaky in places.
Sure. I can hear that because he complained later on that, the band would not kind of change the key of something they wrote
Yeah.
Right.
to fit his vocal, which, made sense. And at the time, I didn't quite, as a non-musician, I was like, well, what does it matter? You just sing it. And now I'm like, oh, I kind of get that it has to be in your range and that some things, you could be a great singer, but if it's not in your key,
Yeah.
it can be really tough.
There's a great example of that, exactly how difficult a key it is to sing in. If you listen to the English version of Three Sides Live, and Phil Collins
Yeah.
doing the very first. I think he sings. I think it's the second or third line, and his voice breaks.
Yeah.
And you go within a hair.
Okay, I'm done.
And, so it is. It's not. That's not an easy melody to sort of
and
sing.
Phil is probably technically a better singer than Phil was,
Yeah,
and if he's having trouble with it too.
Yeah. I wonder how this song would have been if it was only instrumental.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, I suppose one of the things you can do. I mean, did they ever do a 5.1 mix of this?
Yes, yeah, it's on Nursery. So
you can, you can probably
pull the vocal,
disconnect a speaker, and use it.
I think that's where you need to have kind of whether something doing that melody line, whether it's a guitar, piano, organ, some sort of like it's something It's hard to make an instrumental just by pulling the vocal out. It gives you the instrumental track, but then during the verses you realize, maybe not a lot is going on here. So to have something kind of carrying that melody, the vocal melody through the song, there's parts of it that are great. That the band flies through the middle section of this. I think it might have been either this track or Hogweed that I have an interview disc with Phil and Tony from right before Invisible Touch came out, done by an Australian company. It was put out on one of these kind of interview picture discs that you would get back in the day. And it was a great interview, an hour long. And I have it on CD now. But he talks about, the, take 26 of either Hogweed or this, where Phil's just like, I am tired. And I've been doing this all day. And everybody else is trying to get their part done. And my part was great on take 2 or 3. And now I'm doing this. But this track, even if it is take 28 for him, the band flies on this. I think it's fantastic.
One of them more evocative pieces,
right?
And an unusual subject matter about
a hermaphroditic plant, not a plant. I am conflating these two songs here. But, I'm glad the album has the cliff notes, which again, the CD and album that I had did not have.
So much.
Hermaphrodite, a flower containing both male and female organs, a person or animal of both sexes. The child Hermaphroditus was the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, the result of a secret love affair. For this reason, he was entrusted to the nymphs of the isolated Mount Ida, etc., etc. So, again,
Imagine reading this in Spanish. I was like, yeah, okay. I just like the music. I don't care about the lyrics.
I like this band. This is crazy.
I look at this the same way I look at Hogweed. I love the beginning. There's a stretch that comes after that, which I can give or take, and then I come back to the end, and then it has me from there. But there's a little.
Both had given.
Yeah, there's a couple. Well, that's the one part which I love, because when you go to hear the song, like when Hackett plays it in his live shows, and I hate to say it, the first thing, it's my bathroom song at Hackett shows. But I'm quick enough where I come back for the good part of the song. And I love an audience.
Great bladder control.
I love an audience of middle-aged to older men who are trying to sing this part, and you guys can probably, it's instinctive. Both had given everything they had. It's a reflex. You cannot not do that. But to hear an audience of 40, 50-year-old men try to sing that.
This is very sad.
But it does contain what I think is one of Hackett's best guitar solos at the end. I mean, it's an amazing...
it's the one thing I was going to say.
Oh, well, sure.
Stacey, hand it over to Stacey now.
No,
take it out. Take it to the bridge.
This song has my favorite Hackett solo.
Really? This is the favourite Hackett solo?
At the end?
Yes, more than Firth or Fifth.
Sure.
Yeah, more than anything else. I think this is... I said before in the Abacab episode that that album was Rutherford's album. To me, this is Hackett's album.
Really? Okay.
A little bit more, and Collins too to some extent, because he's just playing like a crazy person. But really, his playing on this album is my favorite. I think he's his most aggressive.
Sure.
He's most forward, if that's the correct word. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's like, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. This is his statement.
Right.
Yeah, and he puts the balls on this album.
There you go.
And so this solo is beautiful. When he played this, I heard him play it at the last time he was performing in the Philly area.
Hackett.
Yeah, Hackett. So it was a couple months ago. I mean, blew my mind. I mean, I heard the song new again, and it just made me appreciate that solo and what he contributed to this song and the whole album even more. So
Fantastic. That gets us to the end of the album. So from all this, let's see what our own favorite song on the album is, and then we'll talk about a poll that Tom had.
Yeah, okay.
So Ellie, what's your favorite song on Nursery Cryme?
The Hogwarts song, for some reason.
Very good.
you don't need a reason.
No,
Just
your
because.
favorite.
There you go.
Simon?
I think Musical Box. I think it's really down to the fact that it's, for me personally, I think it's the best arranged track on the album.
Sure.
I think it's the one that has the best build. The sections really flow into one another incredibly well. I want to say it's got Tony's huge organ.
We're allowed to say that.
I was like you. The very first time I actually properly heard this was I was in college, and a friend of mine was playing Seconds Out, and they played the end section of the Musical Box on that, and I was chills up and down my spine. And the great thing is that when I actually went and heard the studio album, I still got those chills.
Yeah.
If you mention like the top 10 tracks that Genesis ever created, this has got to be in it.
Definitely. Stacey?
We all know it's 7 Stones.
No complaints on my side from that.
It's fine. I love the rest of the album. I don't want to think like because I like 7 Stones so much that I think the rest of it's crap. But
Musical Box is crap.
Yeah, no, it's a great album, beginning to end. I mean, the one thing maybe I would change is I would replace Happy the Man with or replace Harlequin with Happy the Man.
Okay.
But other than that, I mean, it's solid all the way through. But 7 Stones, it just gets me right in the balls, lady balls.
There you go.
I gotta,
It's got the 7 lady ball vote there.
7 lady ball vote.
Right. Mr. Tom.
No surprise, I'd have to say Musical Box, because it represents everything I love about progressive rock. And it just, to start off this album, which Nursery Cryme is now, it had so much going for it at the time. They got a new drummer, they got a new guitarist, they got a new Mellotron. And I think the one thing that this opening track of this album really speaks to, it's one word, is confidence. It's like they were kind of getting their footing on the first album and then with Trespass, but with this one, it's just because they had played it live too before, like they know what they're doing and they're confident, and they just race through this track, and it's got beautiful moments and hard moments, and that last moment, the now section, which just, as we said, still brings chills down my neck. And even just to sound really dorky, is when you look at the record sleeve, I mean, just seeing those 5 names together.
Oh yeah.
Banks, Gabriel, Collins, Hackett, Rutherford. Just seeing those 5 names together, it gives you a sense of like, wow, just what those people put together, and this was the start of it. That's why this track is.
It was already perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go. My favorite, I really want to say Musical Box, but I also really want to say Harlequin also. So because Musical Box has 2 votes, I'm going to go with Harlequin. So Harlequin is beautiful to me, and it just, as I said when I talked about it, it just gives that mode of, a wistful summer evening, and it's just works for me.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So Tom, we had on our website, tabletopgenesis.com, a poll about this. So this section of the podcast will be called
Tom shows you his poll.
Tom shows you his poll.
All right, so I want to thank everyone who looked at my poll this week. It was
maybe you voted on
very
your poll.
appreciated. Maybe
It's not ours, it's yours.
It's just my poll, but it's probably no surprise that the number 1 favorite track was Musical Box.
All right,
and almost a 2-to-1 vote over the second favorite. So the second place got half the votes that the first place got.
So run down the order.
So Musical Box was a favorite with about 40% of the vote. That was pretty close. The second favorite was Fountain of Salmacis.
Okay.
And then coming in after that was Hogweed.
All right.
Which a really dorky note was that the 3 longest songs on this album have "the" as in their title.
Mr. Train Spotter.
And after that is kind of a tie between For Absent Friends and 7 Stones. And the last votes were Harold the Barrel and Harlequin.
Really? I didn't think Harlequin and Harold the Barrel would be down that far. I thought that Seven Stones and Four Absent Friends would be.
I just want to say I only voted once.
Me too.
I only voted
Always.
once.
Right. Well, gets us to the end of this episode. Any final thoughts on the album to wrap things up?
I think that this album has more to do with Trespass than it does with Foxtrot. I think Foxtrot, for me personally, signified a new chapter in their career. But I think this is the sign-off of that early period of Genesis.
Sure.
I just, I love the sheer creativity on this album. I think their albums from this period as being more creative, less clever, and then when they get to more the 80s and 90s, it's more clever, a little less creative. I mean, there's both obviously apparent throughout their entire catalog, but this album to me really epitomizes how outside the box they're thinking. You could tell that, I mean, you mentioned before, Simon, the King Crimson influence, which I don't really hear, and not that I'm that familiar with Crimson's catalog, but to me this is so unique. It just stands up on its own. Nothing else sounds like this out there. I challenge anybody to point out an album that sounds like this, or even a song.
I accept that challenge.
Oh,
Challenge accepted.
But yeah, I just love it. And I just like to say, if I had a nickel for every time a guy said to me, "Away from you, cold-blooded woman, your thirst is not mine," I would be a rich woman. So I feel your pain, Gabriel. I know it.
I think it's the album which most closely ties the cover to the music inside. Like, I think it's the one that matches the music
Really?
inside. So kind of like when you look at the cover, it evokes that feeling that you get when you listen to this album start to finish, more than any other album cover did before it or after it. So it's the one where it's the complete package, where other albums I might like better, and their covers are okay. But this is the one where, like, okay, you see this odd, very English, very colorful, bright, but violent and evil cover, and that's what you get on the inside. So I think it's the complete package for me.
That's one word I would use to describe this album: violent. It's a very violent album.
My opinion is more or less the same as you guys. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, the album cover reflects, the visuals of the lyrics. If you read the lyrics and hear the words, it's very visual. You can picture all the characters going on and the stories. And I like that. The order, the sequence of the songs is like intense, soft, intense, soft, intense, soft. You know what I mean?
It goes back to that whole business that an album lives and dies on its pacing.
Right.
In some ways.
Right.
Yeah,
Especially
pacing,
in the pre-CD days. For me, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said they were immune to my herbicidal battering, I'd have at least a nickel or two there for that.
Yeah.
This album for me was, it's funny, it was never one of the main sequence Genesis albums for me when I was getting into the band.
Right.
It was The Lamb, it was Selling England, it was Trick of the Tail, it was the albums from the 80s that really kind of, drew me into the band. And this was almost like Trespass, kind of like a bonus album for me, that had at the time 2 good tracks that I liked, Musical Box, Fountain, and that was kind of it. But over time, again, there's a lot of this album that has grown on me. I think I probably liked Harlequin back in the day when I was a teenager, but I wouldn't, even to myself, I was like, oh, maybe I can't admit that I like those cool, softer songs too, also. So I think for me, this is an album that has grown as it's gone forward. I might even rate it higher than Foxtrot for me presently, mainly because I think Foxtrot has, some great songs on it, but also some that are, in a different, that just don't work for me. But that's for another episode. So I think that's where I'm at with Nursery Cryme. Anybody know why why crime is spelled with a Y?
No. Tell us.
I don't. I wish I knew. Maybe one of our listeners will know.
It's a typo.
It could be. It is a Genesis album. They're known for that.
We didn't proofread.
And so if you happen to know the actual reason why Nursery Cryme has a Y, why crime is spelled with a Y, you can contact us in many different places. We have a Twitter account, which is @Genesis Tabletop. We have our Facebook page, which you can look us up under Tabletop Genesis. We have a website, which is tabletopgenesis.com. And we also have an email account, which you can write to us at genesistabletop@gmail.com. And if you want to write to us, we'll write back. If you want to like us on Facebook, if you want to follow us on Twitter, if you want to stalk us in person, please don't do that. But I think that if you want to contact us, we'd love to hear feedback. Again, we're just starting out with this. If you have any ideas for future shows that are not strictly album themed, if you want to kind of say, if you want to recommend which solo album we should get into first, that might be interesting to hear. We are happy to hear feedback. So thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
and have a great day wherever you are.